diet really does have a huge impact on how people feel and how they're doing. And if you think about the fact that 70+% of our immune system is in the gut, and we just put them through an anti-inflammatory nutrition reset. And so if you do a 30-day reset where you remove the grains, you remove sugar, you remove...
Dr. Sunjya Schweig is redefining functional medicine for the 21st century. His approach combines functional care, root cause science, and patient empowerment to unlock lasting healing and resistance.
The nutrient density that you get from animal proteins is really important, but there's a lot of nuance there. And you can't just go to your grocery store and buy the factory farmed meat and expect that to be healthy for you. There's a big difference in...
The future of longevity is being shaped in Geneva this October. The Global Longevity Summit is an intimate gathering at the Genolia Innovation Hub, running from October the 28th to the 30th, with pioneers like Aubrey de Grey, Matt Kaberlein, and Amy Killen. I am grateful to be joining as an advisor. And if you would like to be there too, you can get 10% off tickets with the code BEYONDTOMORROW. Just check the description for the link. I'll see you there.
What will someone listening get out of this episode today?
Yeah, my hope is that it will be a deep dive on the state of medicine, the state of functional medicine, but really that intersection space between, a lot of these movements that we're seeing in globally around healthcare and the opportunities that we see both with functional medicine, with lifestyle medicine, with AI and tech, and also with Healthspan and longevity. And I think there's a lot of really interesting companies, a lot of really interesting thinkers in this space. And my hope is that we'll just dive deep and unpack a lot of that and think together about some of the work that we're doing and some of the directions this is going. And I hope that the listener out there will be inspired to really take charge of their own lives.
Because you have a functional clinic in Marin County in San Francisco, right? And so you're dealing with a lot of people and you wear many hats almost in this space, and you're combining all those to give your patients or your members the optimal care possible. Yeah. What does that journey look like if I were to walk into your clinic today?
Early on in my education, I went to the UCSF Santa Rosa Family Practice Program, but I was always really inspired by this idea of functional medicine, which is root cause medicine. A lot of the time, most of the time in the US, and I think globally, our healthcare system, if you think of a model of a tree, healthcare system is very much focused on those outer leaves and canopy, basically trying to prune back the final manifestations of disease. And so a lot of our treatments, they're mostly drug-based: drug, surgery, physical therapy, rehab, et cetera. Those are the main tools that a doctor has. The drugs are basically, usually lower your blood sugar, lower your cholesterol, lower your blood pressure, block pain, turn off the immune system. They're very much, so after the proverbial cat is out of the bag. So they're working on, you're trying to prune back, whereas we're trying to work on those root cause inputs, all right? So as far down the cause chain as possible, where, we're a little bit less attached to an actual diagnosis sometimes and much more interested in common pathways. And so functional medicine is very systems biology. If you think about Lee Hood and the Institute of Systems Biology, it's the intersection, it's the interaction of everything. And so our clinic is virtual. And so we take care of people all over the US. And we've really built out a system of being able to deliver that care really effectively. And a lot of that is getting the right testing, doing deep dive intakes. We ask people to give us a lot of information, both on...
So let's break that down. So testing, like what sort of, I'm walking in, what tests do I do?
Our onboarding sequence of a patient coming to see us, work with us, is usually 3 to 4 visits. Okay. And we sequence that out with our team. It's very team driven. And so we work very collaboratively, and very lucky to have an amazing staff, an amazing team of clinicians. And so they'll see an initial team member will order a deep dive blood panel, which is very similar, 100 plus biomarkers, very similar to a lot of the commercial offerings you see now. We've been doing this for a decade, but we'll get those results back, and then we'll provide that information to the patient. And then at that point, we will then dive into more of a functional medicine testing. At that point, we'll be looking at gut microbiome and are there any chronic infections in the gut, usually with at least 1, if not 2 stool tests. A lot of times we will then also do specialized hormone and saliva testing for, adrenal status and hormone status. We will do, if we're concerned that somebody might have a mold issue, we'll do specialized testing there. We'll do a deep dive on other chronic infections if that's needed. We'll do a lot of times if people are having a lot of GI symptoms, what's called a SIBO test, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so those, a lot of times we'll pick and choose from that cohort of initial testing, but stage it, because we're known to sometimes overwhelm people, right? Because we have so many tools and so much things that we can look at, that when we do it all at once and then sit down with the person and just kind of give them all this information, it can be too much. And so we've staged it. We do go sequence now and basically deliver that care step at a time, provide them with some initial, treatment directions, have them come back once those functional medicine tests are done. And then we have what's called our case review visit, where we sort of put the whole case together and really feedback to them what they've told us, what we're seeing on the testing data, what their initial response to some of the first interventions were, and then move forward from there.
I would love to segue a bit into, because if usually people will get the blood tests, they will get all the tests done, and then they would, the bit that comes a bit unstuck is the actionable insights, like what to then do. So I would love to move into we talk a lot in the longevity space of these crazy advanced therapeutics, the stem cells and all this. But when we look at the basics, let's unpack that. So with food, what would you recommend for someone? Because there's so much debate right now around different protocols and different diets and whether someone should eat meat or not. What do you recommend?
Great question. We're thinking about health span longevity. I agree with you. There's so much hype right now. There's so much discussion. There's so much attention on, these ultra expensive, frequently very experimental, not always proven therapies or concepts, these moonshot goals even. And I think of it like a pyramid, right? And so these sort of, upper tier interventions or even, testing or procedures, very expensive and maybe harder to get and also more experimental. I think that was the top tier. In the middle, things like peptides and maybe even stem cells or hyperbaric oxygen or plasmapheresis or, even medications, repurposed medications like rapamycin, metformin, et cetera. Some costs, some evidence mixed still on some of them, but, more accessible. But the bottom 80% of that pyramid is all of the lifestyle pieces. Yeah. And we know that those are the primary drivers of health and the primary drivers of health span and longevity. And it's the same with our patients, whether someone is just trying to optimize their health or they're very sick and they've been sick for a long time and they're trying to get back on track. So diet is by far the number one driver of that. And
more so than sleep or exercise or
sleep. So it's diet, sleep, and neuroplasticity or brain. So those are all very important pieces. But if you think about the fact that 70+% of our immune system is in the gut, the health of the gut, the health of the microbiome, are there hidden infections, and then what you're eating, what you're taking in are incredible drivers. And so diet really does have a huge impact on how people feel and how they're doing. And so when we take our patients, we've also done wellness programs with firefighters and first responders, and it's 4 to 6 month long program. The first month is gut and diet and nutrition. And we just put them through an anti-inflammatory nutrition reset. And that, same with our patients, is basically assessing where they are, what are they eating currently? Are there any obvious foods that they know they're reacting to? And then, educating them on what we think is the optimal, which is anti-inflammatory template diet. Frequently leaning more towards paleo, but not necessarily heavy on the meat, just that grains can be inflammatory for a lot of people. And so if you do a 30-day reset where you remove the grains, you remove sugar, you remove alcohol, those are the top ones. If people can't remove the grains, then we definitely ask them at least to be 100% gluten-free, just because that's also a very inflammatory trigger. We're just trying to get a signal of what's going to help their body reset from an immune point of view, or what's going to lower the inflammation in the body. So putting them through, we also provide them information on not just what that's going to take, but let's look at your pantry. Let's do a pantry clean out prior, because inevitably you're going to have cravings and you're going to get tired and you're going to grab whatever's there, and so make sure you're setting yourself up for success, right? And so it's partly preparing them, sort of doing a pre-check and then implementation, but then it's also a lot about support, right? Giving them the support they need. Health behavior change is hard, right? It's one thing we've learned a lot over the years, and to be successful over a long time really takes a lot of attention and a lot of motivation, but also just education. You have to kind of know. So I'm not a big fan of vegan diets. I think it can be helpful for some people, but there's just, I worry that people end up nutrient deficient in a lot of areas. Vegetarian works for some people as long as you're really proactive about making sure you're getting your protein, getting your B vitamins, et cetera. But we do see people deficient in B vitamins, which are really important for a lot of different body processes.
Where do you get your B vitamins from?
So a lot of animal, organ meats, animal meats, etc. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise supplementation.
Yeah. It's so interesting because then you have Brian Johnson, who's vegetarian, and then you have people like Paul Saladino who talk a lot about the importance of meat consumption. I think one of the issues in this space is this, this weird divide between eating meat and not eating meat and all these, and it's very confusing for many people. And so it's like, do you see in the why both camps are right? Or is
I do.
Okay.
And I think it's balanced. I think I like what Mark Hyman said about sort of, paleo vegan or pegan. I think it should be, the majority of your plate should be vegetables. Like there's no arguing with that. Like vegetables are amazing. The genetic information that they provide to our bodies, that our body needs, the nutrients, the vitamins, and we talk a lot about eating the rainbow, right? So eating a lot of different colored vegetables. But the nutrient density that you get from animal proteins is really important, I think. But there's a lot of nuance there. And you can't just go to your grocery store and buy the factory farmed meat and expect that to be healthy for you. There's a big difference in the nutrient content, in the omega-3 content of a grass-fed beef than there is of a factory farmed beef that was exposed to hormones and antibiotics. And in the US, I think it's even worse than it is in a lot of parts of the world. But a lot of parts of the world, is not very clean food. So that's a big difference there, right?
How big are we talking? So for example, if I were to go for a steak today and it was grass-fed because of something else, I know the grass-fed one is better, but how much of that is just like, saying it's grass-fed, saying it's grass-fed? Is there like a metric of saying the grass-fed one has twice as many omega-3s?
Yeah, it has significantly more omega-3s, and it has significantly less compounds that are what we call Franken foods for our gut, right? They're going to be gut disruptors. They're going to have hormone or antibiotic residues in there and cause disruption to our system. Plate, I think that the majority of vegetables but a small amount of nutrient dense food. It's very hard to get that nutrient density without some degree of animal products in the diet. I think it's also very important there's huge swaths of people in many countries who do fine with a full vegetarian diet. And then we see when they're introduced, Western food or fast food is introduced, then we see rising rates of metabolic syndrome and diabetes, prediabetes, obesity, etc. But yeah, eating a lot of, for example, white rice is challenging on the glycemic load, on the blood sugar. And blood sugar is another huge driver of health, blood sugar balance. So
when you're doing your tests at your clinic, especially when you look at food and exercise and sleep, how much of that is related to doing DNA genetic tests? As an example, myself, I am Lebanese origin. My family is from Lebanon, and my grandparents, and I repeat this on many podcasts, my grandparents and great-grandparents went through a time of great famine in Lebanon. Half the country passed, and many left, and they emigrated to the US and other places. Also, when I eat certain foods, I all of a sudden just want to eat so much. So like when I have carbs, when I have sugar, oh my God, it's like I feel like I haven't eaten for 7 days and I just need to take in as many calories as possible.
Yeah, so it's like it's speaking to your genetics, that famine history. Maybe there's like a priming there that is.
Well, that's what I think. That's what my mind has. I was like, yes, it's because my grandparents went through famine. Right. Is that true?
Potentially, yes. It's not something that we've looked at on testing, but that's very interesting. The response to carbs, like when you're in that phase of eating a lot of simple carbs or sugar, it's much more labile, and it's
labile.
Yeah, like meaning you eat it and you want it more, or if you're you go through swings, much bigger swings, right? So it really drives you. It's also interestingly, sometimes if there are microbiome imbalances in the gut, particularly with any fungal load or candidal load, that can also really cause, when you eat sugar, to cause you to crave it more, to have it be something that drives you to want more of it. And that's partly because of the metabolic byproducts that they produce. But when you get into a habit of not eating carbs a lot or not eating sugar, that actually quiets down a lot, that craving.
And that happens to me. That's like a big
Interesting.
thing. So it's the candidal load you just said.
Potentially, that might be one driver. Yeah.
Okay. And is that something that appears in carbohydrates, or is it something that is in my gut already that gets exacerbated?
Right. So and I would talk about this topic a little bit cautiously, because it's for many, many years, even dating back 20, 30 years, Candida as a term, Candida is a yeast. It's a fungal organism. which is super recognized in mainstream medicine. You can get thrush, in your mouth, white coating, which is Candida. It's a fungal organism. You can test for it and you can treat it with nystatin or other antifungal medications. This lay term of Candida overgrowth, or there's a lot of anti-Candida diet. It's a little bit overplayed. I think it's real. But I think it's a little bit overplayed. And then so for many years, it was like, oh, Candida is responsible for all of my, list name of symptom here. But it is a real phenomenon. And so, but you can have a fungal load in your gut. You can have, there's the microbiome, there's the fungome, you can have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO. You can also have small intestinal fungal overgrowth or SIFO. And so, but you can see this a lot of times on stool testing. You can see Candida or other fungal organisms. And you can also see it on organic acid testing. Markers like arabinose or D-arabinitol can be elevated. And I'm also seeing it a lot these days when people are exposed to environmental mold in water damaged building or in their environment, that sometimes we'll see a fungal load in showing up on a stool test, for example. But colloquially, then those organisms use simple carbohydrates and sugar to grow. And so then, when you consume those carbs or that sugar, that can potentially drive extra growth and then they potentially make you want to eat more.
Brilliant. So so you've cleaned the pantry out.
Get rid of the sugar, because sugar, sounds like that, in the short term, you're going to crave it. You're going to want it, right? 100%. You get tired, you need to pick me up, you need an emotional pick me up. Yeah. Get rid of the alcohol. Get rid of what we call the white menace, right? The crackers, the cookies, the cake, the pasta, the rice, and so and then set yourself up for success. Get yourself and sort of front load with, try out some different snacks that are going to work for you, and put some in your bag, and put some in your car, and put some at work, and so you kind of know what you're going to do when you get hungry, because you will get hungry, until things kind of balance out with that level of success. And then what's super interesting with me with this is the thing I love about doing this first before we really start giving people any other medications or protocols or supplements is that a lot of times they come in for that second visit or that third visit and they're already feeling better. Their brain's clearer, they have more energy, they're sleeping better, their exercise capacity is better. Maybe if they were having some pain or joint pain or gut issues, that's better. And so that signal is really important because it shows them a lot of, or some of what they're experiencing is under their control, right? And they don't need something from outside to fix them, because we give people a lot of supplements, at least in the short term. We do a lot of testing. Well, it depends. A lot of us, so we're very test, don't guess. We like to kind of make sure we're targeting results.
Are there like 2 or 3 that every single person pretty much takes? Again,
it's test driven, but many people end up needing adrenal support, hormone support, so an adaptogenic herb formula. A lot of times, depending on testing, if their vitamin D is low, we will support that. We target, vitamin D levels on testing. A lot of times people end up needing B vitamins. In certain cases, definitely more women than men, iron can be really helpful, but we also want to make sure we know what the infection load is there, because iron can drive some infections. And then if we're seeing results on the stool testing or on the SIBO testing, we use a lot of herbal antimicrobial protocols, which have sort of killing herbs for the gut, rebalancing, probiotics, prebiotics, biofilm agents, et cetera. The list goes on. And then it kind of down from there, depending on what they need.
It's interesting you mentioned the adaptogenic herb as the first one. I'd never really come across. What is it doing to the body?
Yeah, so adaptogenic herbs are fascinating. A lot of the research in adaptogens comes out of the Russian society, but also the Russian space program, because they really looked into a lot of these compounds. So things like rhodiola, schizandra, Siberian ginseng, and they're basically like smart herbs. And so if your adrenal system or your stress system needs, sort of a lift, they can do that. Or if it's, you're sort of more sympathetic nervous system driven and you need more of a calm down parasympathetic boost, they can also do that. And so that's why the term adaptogenic comes from. They can, they kind of adapt to what your body needs at that time. And I definitely find that those are really helpful for many, many people. And you can experience better energy and consistency of energy, also the adrenal system, cortisol balance, and some of your stress hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine come in large part from the adrenal glands. And so, a lot of us, I think, are in this sympathetic state of working too much, burning the candle at both ends, feeling fatigued or wired but tired. So they're really applicable for a lot of people, in any stages of life, and including those just trying to optimize, right? So, yeah. And so we do a lot of, saliva testing on this and find, either a lot of times we see low cortisol output, or we see what we call a dysregulated adrenal curve. You should see a nice diurnal variation where, circadian variation, where you see a rise of cortisol early in the day, and then it drops down, sequentially over the course of the day, and it drops down to its lowest point around or a little bit after you're going to bed. And so that can be associated with not enough energy during the day, poor cognitive function, or also insomnia. If your cortisol is a little bit too high at night, you're going to have trouble falling asleep, or you're going to have trouble staying asleep. And so there's a lot of reasons to test that and to work on it.
Linking that is exercise next. And we'd love to talk about how exercise affects your cortisol levels. But what I find is when I do anaerobic respiration or exercise, like very intense exercise, like zone 4, zone 5 exercise, all of a sudden my gut I become best friends with my gut. My gut's all of a sudden saying to me, I just want you to put healthy foods in my stomach, and I don't really want to eat that much. Actually, the one thing that I do that affects my everything more than anything is high intensity workouts. It's completely, I see also the autophagy going on, as in like my face, I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh my God, I've got this glow. What's happening there?
That's fascinating. So how long do you do a HIIT exercise session for?
It might be like one of your classic, like one Rebel or Barry's, or any like specific set, so 45 50 minute class when you've got someone shouting at you and you're jumping onto a treadmill and doing all these sprints. They're very popular now in like New York, London, and major
like
cities.
A boot camp kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. But it just seems that if I can do that 2-3 times a week, that's the one thing that holds me accountable and like nothing else.
Wow. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of factors. I think there's probably a stress hormone, balance there. I think that, I wonder if there's an inflammatory trigger there that you're modulating. It's interesting because a lot of people like Peter Attia, for example, really advocates for a lot of zone 2, right? And then strength, right? And we see it the other way too, where we have people who are over exercisers. They're really pushing their body too hard for too long, for too frequently. And that's taking a really big toll. The long distance runners, the marathon runners, like you'll see a lot of gut breakdown, a lot of intestinal permeability worsening. And so it's interesting that you're finding that sweet spot. And it might also be a blood sugar thing. It might be a blood sugar balance where, because if you have any tendency towards pre-metabolic, or you have tendency towards insulin resistance, or you have maybe a little bit high baseline blood sugar or a little bit high insulin, that level of intense workout and intense cardiovascular, but also muscle workout, your muscles have their own independent glucose transporter that is not doesn't rely on insulin. And so when you're working your body out to that level, you're putting away, they're using it, they just need it. They need it to be metabolically active. And so you're putting away more blood sugar than you normally would be. And I wonder if that's part of the mechanism why it feels good for you.
It's interesting you say that with PCT, because I know that VO2 max is, everyone's raving about VO2 max, rightfully so. And then you look at heart rate variability, which has become, popularized by wearables. Yeah. And actually for me, if I'm doing strength training 3-4 times a week on my wearable, my Whoop or whatever, maybe accurate, maybe not, my HRV and my VO2 max have just gone to the toilet, because the last 3-4 months I've gained quite a bit of weight. I've done strength training, but I wasn't doing much high intensity workout because I'd been doing that for years and I needed a break from it. And since I've got back to doing high intensity workouts, my VO2 max and my HRV have started to go up again, like direct, and my resting heart rate has gone down.
Wow. Do you feel stressed a lot? Like, is there in general?
So I'm someone who I have to be very aware of my nervous system, as in getting into my sympathetic nervous system. It's something that I'm constantly having to stay on top of, because I've had a few, traumatic injuries in the past. And so I think my body just has a tendency to
go into that fight flight. Yeah,
exactly. But morning routine and breath work and all this, I know exactly what I need to do. And I think it's the nature of where we're at right now, where people are becoming more aware of the need for personalized healthcare. And at the same time, it feels like there is still like very like everyone should take 10 or 5 grams of creatine. You know, that's something that's it's most studied thing. Creatine is good for everyone.
3 to 5, yeah.
Is it good for everyone?
I think it can be good for many, many people.
Okay.
I think, yeah. And I think the evidence is really interesting around muscle and workout capacity, but also around brain. It is definitely one of the hottest supplements in the Healthspan longevity space right now.
Yeah.
So I would put that on my short list. Also, to your previous question, also omega-3 balance, I think is super important. Vitamin C, magnesium, I think is amazing. I think magnesium is an incredible supplement. But also to go back to the field is just really interesting also. It's like very influencer driven, right? And so like this is the right diet, or this is the right supplement stack, or this is the right exercise program. I've always struggled with just how dogmatic people get, and then how the discussion is much more about, oh, this person is right or this person is wrong. And it's more of like a, you know, in all the discussion groups or, you know, wherever people are chatting about these things, like it's antagonistic and argumentative, right? But the basic tenets of what does it take to be healthy is not something that we need to argue about. And there's a small subset of people who are super highly motivated and they're kind of just like hashing out the details of some of these, you know, subtopics. But I think that sometimes escapes the point for me, right? I love what you're talking about, which is because you're obviously very driven and motivated and smart, and you know, you're trying things and you're feeling how it feels in your body, right? And so that I think is the key. Like just because we're all, it's N of 1, and it's N of 1. I think also with variation across the year and variation across our age and like you know where we are at in our lives and what we need. And so
N of 1 being the idea that we're all different. We're all
biochemical individuality. We are all unique beings. Yeah. And so it makes sometimes, you know, protocol driven treatments hard, but yeah, we're all unique, and it also makes research hard. But yeah.
So it brings on, and we're getting into maybe the philosophies of this space, which is people love to shout about stuff that's worked for them. And so I got into trouble when I was younger because I had started going to see every other practitioner to try and, you know, heal. And so when one would work for me, I'd be like, try this. And actually a bunch of friends would come back and be like, dude, didn't really work for me. That was expensive, whatever. Like, thanks, no thanks. So it's now kind of taking a step back and realizing, okay, this really works for me, trying to understand why, and then be like, okay, maybe try this out. I think it's crazy how many health podcasts, that's everything there are. And it's amazing that still the different things are repeated and other stuff is said. And maybe it's propping up an industry that hopefully eventually will have clarity. But we live in a space where, and this is a space that everyone has their own opinion. And so trying to cut through the noise is somewhat difficult. So
yeah, and it's almost becomes like, you know, a religious argument at points. Like people get attached to ideas and protocols because it worked for them sometimes, but I think they also get attached to them because they think it's going to work for them, or they just like it, or they hope that it's going to work for them. And maybe I think sometimes there's some desperation there. And so it just really does come down to what works for you doesn't have to be what works for somebody else. And so we teach our patients that a lot, right? Yeah. And I think that, you know, we do see a lot of patients who have seen other practitioners and have come to us still needing help. And I just really try to educate people on awareness for their body and awareness for their own unique signals that they can get. But I also think that one of the things that we've tried to figure out also is can you get other data signals on that, right? How can we track some of these responses? I think wearables are very interesting there. I think sleep quality. And we also ask people to fill out a lot of what we call patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs, you know, sort of symptom tracking, giving us information, a long list of different things that can be happening in their body, and just checking the boxes, yes, no, you know, rating them. And so it's kind of a pain for the patient, but it is super helpful for us. So we have like a decade of this data. And it also really comes down to people sometimes forget what they were feeling like when they started. And so I can bring up, you know, a spreadsheet and show someone, I can ask them how you're feeling. They say, oh, I'm okay, not that much better. And I can bring up a spreadsheet and, well, look, here's where you rated yourself when we started working together, or whatever, a year ago, you know, year and a half ago. And, you know, we're at half of where we were now. There's maybe still a lot of symptoms, but many things are better. And they'll look at it and be, oh yeah, that's true. Wow. I forgot that I was used to have headaches. And oh yeah, my brain function is a lot better. That's accurate. And so that, you know, level of recall, because people, I think there's a negativity bias. You always kind of focus on the things that aren't working. Right. So to that point, we also ask a lot of people to do brain retraining work, to do neuroplasticity work. And things like breathwork are amazing. We have a Qigong program that I had a colleague of mine build. And, I think Qigong is amazing. I think yoga is amazing. I think meditation is amazing. But there's different techniques out there of brain retraining, of rewiring the limbic system. Because you absolutely, like you have experienced, do get into fight flight and your trauma signal lands on the body, and it's just a very intense time that we live in, and so we're constantly bombarded with scary messages and think sympathetic driving experiences, like being on our screens and being on our devices, and artificial light exposure and toxins and pollution, the exposome, right? There's a great talk at the ARDD conference yesterday on the exposome and the importance of this. So getting in there, rewiring the brain can be really, really important for people. And so there's a number of programs that we lean on for that. And I'm always careful to tell people that I'm not saying that your health issues are in your head. I'm not saying fixing your perception of your health is going to fix everything, but we're going to be doing testing. We're going to be doing supplements. We're going to be doing treatments. Our clinics can be guiding that. And you can work on this side yourself and gain a modicum of control, like you can with the nutrition and the diet and sleep and the lifestyle, right? So it's bi-directional. We come from both sides.
It's really, really hard. As someone who's, again, I would say I've got quite high agency and I really want to make the changes. And be the first one to admit that I struggle to get 7 hours sleep. Yeah, sleep is something that I work hard on, but there's so many distractions. And so when people say to me, oh yeah, but what's the point of someone taking peptides or stem cells or whatever if they can't get the basics right? Like, well, the basics, the counter argument to that is the basics can be hard to get right because of the world we live in. We have so many addictions around us. The world has been built to, it's a casino that we're constantly walking around in. So
the world's been built to prey upon our neurological pathways and our dopamine reward system. And, the social media and screens, they just were super intentional about that, of just getting more users to stay on app. And now with AI, so the health behavior piece is hard. And I think that I've also been brainstorming a lot about what does that take to make that more successful. And I think it takes health coaching. I think health coaches are really helpful there. Assessment, readiness for change, and then hand-holding, guidance, check-ins. I think group programs, group visits are really helpful because people hold each other accountable. And it's really interesting for them and it's engaging, to be in community around a lot of this work. I think community is just a critical piece. And I think data is really helpful. When we did the firefighter wellness programs, we built a dashboard and we fed the data back to the participants in an anonymous way. And so there was an anonymized data dashboard with like a champagne bubble graph where you could see where you are relative to everybody else. And particularly with firefighters and police, they're very competitive. And so they're like, well, I don't want to be down here. I want to be at the top. And so we gamified it and let them increasingly drive health outcomes that way. So that was really powerful. I think, test data is really helpful, showing people what you're seeing and telling them, okay, there's a problem. There's, you're in the proverbial desert and here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you out of there. Here's the path. That's really helpful. And I think there's a big opportunity for AI here too. Like I was just playing with ChatGPT the other day because I agree with you. I'm we're here talking and I'm acting as if I know everything, but really like I also struggle with adhering to health behavior change and been wanting to be more efficient and be more effective and use my time better and get off my screen by 9 p.m. and get to bed on time and do my workouts regularly and take supplements. So I was playing around with using ChatGPT as an accountability coach and just setting it up properly, giving it the prompts. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to check in, ask me questions. Here's my goals. Ask me how I'm doing. And then I'm going to give you the data during the day. And then I want you to report back to me at the end of the day. I want you to give a summary, calculate, my efficiency of sort of work time spent versus categories of other, whether it's social or family or restorative time, and take pictures of food and have you process that and tell me, feedback there. And so it's definitely a work in progress. It's not perfect. I was getting some glitches. I want to try to get in there and try to vibe code something better, but it was a fun experiment. And I think that human coaches, are the richest experience, but how do we democratize this? I think AI will play a role, right? Yeah. Increasingly. Mixed feelings there, right? Because this whole huge issues around people forming, more reliant relationships with AI and the problems with that and almost like the mirage of connection that is there as opposed to real human connection. So a lot to talk about, but finding that sweet spot I think is going to be really important.
So interesting. Let's go on to metabolic health. Where does one start? This is a trending topic, but what I know of the metabolism is that, a higher metabolism means that I can eat more food. That's a very basic way of looking at it. And there are certain things that I can do to improve my metabolic rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so metabolic rate, metabolic subtypes, trying to understand. For me, it's driven a lot by, glucose response, blood sugar response, what foods does your body process well, and what foods will drive up blood sugar spikes. And it's very different. Some people, respond, you eat an apple, or you eat some grapes, or you eat some rice, or whatever it is, and you're going to respond differently from somebody else. And also probably respond differently at different times of the day, or if you're underslept or overstressed based on your stress hormone profile, and also respond differently depending on what you eat, how you combine foods, right? Yeah. So food combination is super important. For us, there's a lot of baseline testing that we do there, looking at A1C, looking at fasting blood sugar, looking at deep dive lipid profiles, above and beyond, just the basics. And then using CGM is super powerful, continuous glucose monitor, and so putting one of those on for 2 weeks, getting readout of your blood sugar every 5 minutes or so over the course of that time frame. We like people just to put them on and not do anything differently, just get a baseline. And let's just see what's showing up, and then come back to our team, look at the data together, and then potentially, have a second round where you then use another device, and or maybe in that first 2 weeks, you can try different trials, learn about the first phase is learning about what's happening at the baseline for your body. And the second phase is then learning how to optimize, right? And so, simple things, but like if you're going to have some pasta, or you're going to have some rice, or you're going to have some cookie or something, if you combine that carb, sugar with protein or with fat, that will blunt the rise, right? So you basically want to minimize the area under the curve of that blood sugar rise, in terms of how high, and then also how long does it stay high. And similarly, like, if you eat a meal, but it spikes your blood sugar, but then you go for a walk, or you do some push-ups, or you do some weightlifting, your blood sugar will come right down, right? Because your muscles are using that sugar. So it'll pull it out of the bloodstream. And so you can start to learn about how to manage that and how to optimize your metabolism. There's deeper dive things you can do around figuring out what your glucotype is, like what happens to you with certain foods. And there's some really interesting work that Dr. Michael Snyder has published on this out of Stanford. You can go pretty deep on this. I don't think that people need to have a CGM on forever. Some people do. They wear them a lot. They're pretty trendy right now in Healthspan longevity medicine. But at least doing some rounds of it can be really important.
And then with sleep, where does one start?
Yeah, sleep is one that's near and dear to my heart because it's a personal challenge for me. I think ever since I was in residency and had to be on call a lot and just up at odd hours and, get paged, and, it was really a traumatic experience. It was very disruptive, very stressful, and it's just so many nights of it, and 2+ years of med school and another 3+ years of residency. In residency, there were times when I would have 3 pagers on me at once. And I also started picking up heart math biofeedback around that time. So I'd have 3 pagers and then my heart math biofeedback device, which I called my happy pager. But, so sleep has been challenging for me for a long time. So I've done a lot of deep dives on this. I'm really trying to work on how do I optimize my own sleep, which can be restless. I do pretty well, but I can be restless and feel a little non-restored on some days. Primary thing is just sleep hygiene, right? And so I think that's a little bit of a overused term. Like, just people understand that to mean you just have to sleep better, but really there's a lot you can do. I think it's really important to understand sleep hygiene and unpack that for a minute. And, so sleep hygiene is basically a sequence of different timestamps or action points that you have choices to make or interventions to make across the day. And some of the most important ones for me are, what time do you eat dinner at? And I think, finishing your dinner around 6 p.m. would be ideal if you're planning on about a 10 p.m. bedtime. And so 6 to 7 is pushing it a little bit, but the longer gap you have between, when you last ate and going to bed, for many people is very helpful for sleep. And there's a saying, breakfast like a king or queen, lunch like a prince or princess, and then dinner like a pauper can be very helpful for respecting the metabolic activity of the liver, which slows down. The liver clock slows down its metabolic activity around 3-4 p.m. And so, so what time do you eat dinner? Natural light exposure versus artificial light exposure. So modulating that, which is very hard in our society. We're all exposed to a lot of artificial light in general, especially in the evenings. Screen time, right? So trying to get off of your screen. For me, really around 8 p.m. If I'm trying to go to bed around 10, if it's later, then I really do feel a difference, and I feel a hit from the blue light exposure, and I feel just more wired and activated, and don't sleep as well. Doing some kind of a wind down activity, ideally, whether it's breath work or stretching or yoga, just restorative time. The bedroom should be for sex and sleep only, right? And so you're not eating, you're not eating in the bedroom. You're not watching TV. You're not on your screen. Yeah. I do like to read before bed, but then also what are you reading? Are you reading a really activating murder mystery or something, really intense, or are you reading something that's, helping you wind down? Some people find taking a bath before bed can be really helpful. And that's partly because if you warm the body up and then that you get out of the bath, and the natural drop in temperature signals that you are getting ready for bed. And so also, having the bedroom be cool, having it be dark, having there not be any noise, right? So using, blackout curtains and using a noisemaker if you need to, a white noisemaker, or an eye mask if you need to for the light. And then flip it all the way around to the morning time. Sachin Panda has talked a lot about the importance of getting morning light exposure, right? And so you go out, basically my morning routine is to wake up, take my shower, wash up, go out to the kitchen, drink a big glass of water, try to just get 20 ounces of water in right then, sometimes with some electrolytes in it usually, and then go outside, go for a walk. And, 10, 15 minutes of walking, you get that natural light exposure, even if it's overcast, and that activates your melanopsin receptor in your eyes, which basically tells your body this is the start of the day. And so you have a better time than understanding when is the end of the day. Yeah. So all those aspects. And then from there, obviously, what you're eating, when you're eating, how you're eating, sugar, blood sugar imbalances, exercise, stress management, those all play a role during the day. But there's a lot that can be done.
As someone who runs a virtual clinic, are you optimistic on the path forward for humanity right now? For what you see coming into your clinic and the changes in habits and healthy habits? I
am, but I'm kind of an eternal optimist. I am optimistic. I think we have an incredible amount of challenges currently as well as ahead of us. I'm very excited about technology. I'm very bullish on AI and where we are and I'm having a lot of fun, even more fun now than I was even just a few years ago. I think it's just incredibly exciting and dynamic time. We're all at the cusp of this new world. But I think it's going to bring a lot of trouble too, and a lot of pain and a lot of challenge, on many fronts. So I think it's not without some areas of concern. But I am optimistic because, for health in general, because of the democratization that's going to occur with technology and the ability for people to get answers. Obviously, accurate answers is still a challenge sometimes with AI, but be able to find information, ask questions, try different things, and also access to testing. I think that's a really interesting movement around ability to purchase testing and get it unsiloed from the healthcare system and imaging. And so I think that one thing I really resonate with the whole Healthspan longevity movement, Peter Diamandis said it at the Buck last year. He's like, the number one goal is don't die of something stupid. And dying of something stupid, we could put, riding a motorbike without a helmet or jumping off a mountain in a squirrel suit. Those are pretty high risk activities, but we can also add, know what your lipids are, know what the imaging looks like. Do you have, any precancerous issues? Do you have anything that could be addressed and we have the opportunity to intervene early? Know what your cardiac status is, know what your lipids are. Many, many different aspects that we now have the ability to do a deep dive on and to have information about. And that's a really exciting place to be. And I really see rapid change in that area right now.
Very exciting. So as we move forward, I'd love to go into your crystal ball of where this whole space is moving over the next 5 years. What do you think will be added to your offering as a clinician? Do you think, as an example, that soon you'll be offering plant medicine or psychedelic therapy, assisted therapy, or protocol where everyone has to be on hyperbaric chambers or whatever? Like, what do you think will be added to your offering?
I think that one of the areas that we are really expanding into is just how do we continue to move the needle on what it takes to be successful in finding your path in this care and in optimizing your health, again, across the spectrum. Whether you're an optimizer, you're a biohacker, you're a Healthspan longevity driven, or you have some health challenges that you're trying to solve. And I think that that's a lot of what we talked about today, but it's also the support and the health behavior change. But I think that what we're really driven on is how do we make the best use of these mountains of data that we're generating, and how do we harness this digital exhaust that we're all kind of giving off from our wearables, from our social media, from our device use, from geolocation. You can map that to environmental exposures, like air quality and even weather fluctuations. So like just an incredible amount of data that I've always dreamed about, being able to have a dashboard that shows us. And I always say that two industries that I think have the best dashboards are the weather companies, and so being able to visualize different aspects of the weather and then also the financial. So, but we need those dashboards for humans, right? So we need that human operating system. And I really see a lot of movement in this space. And so there's a lot of big companies that are becoming players in this. But there's also some colleagues and friends of mine who are building these operating systems that will be available for small clinics and for individuals even, right? And so having that ability and then layering on AI and machine learning and the technology that we're increasingly developing, I think is going to unlock a lot of power, right? And so I think that's probably the area that we're mostly looking into. I'm very curious about some of the other things that you mentioned, whether it's journey work or psychedelic medicine. I don't anticipate that we'll become specialists in that. It's a whole another world. I think it can be helpful for some. And hyperbaric, I think, is an adjunct therapy. I think that's along with many pieces that we discuss with patients. But yeah, that's kind of so I'm just really curious about the tech and the AI, but also like always focused on how do we help the individual achieve optimal health, right? How do we help that person on their journey? How do we help them figure out what the need is? How do we help them stick to the plan? And I think a lot of that actually comes back to the tech piece, but there's also, like James Clear's work on atomic habits. Like how do you, having goals is good, but having systems is better, right? You can always fall back on your systems. And so helping to build those systems is really the place that I'm excited about.
Yeah, I heard a saying a few days ago, which is it's harder to build in behaviors, but it's much easier to embrace your identity. So if you think of yourself as a healthy person, then you're more likely to be healthy. Or do you think of yourself as a muscular or a person who's outgoing or whatever?
Yeah.
Your belief system very much guides you.
Yeah.
Actually changing behavior at times can be quite difficult.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly what James Clear talks about. Yeah. Just like, forecasting forward and imagining it, or it's a little bit like fake it till you make it, right? Like just, this is where you want to end up, focus on the end goal. This is saying in neurology also that neurons that fire together, wire together, right? And so that's also part of the neuroplasticity. But if you focus on where you want to go and you don't necessarily focus on where you don't want to go, that's where you're going to go, right? That's just the direction you're heading, and you'll manifest that, but not in a hokey way, right? In a very like science-driven way. And having the belief of what you want to be, where you want to go, and coming to that, doing the work around that to clarify that can be hard too, right? A lot of folks have trouble with attention and executive function these days. And, but mapping that out and getting increasingly aware of your internal environment, I think is really important. So I lean a lot on, for example, the work of Jim Dethmer, the 15 habits of, the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. And recently looking at Byron Katie, the work, right? Just becoming aware of your internal thoughts and learning to recognize those, capture them, and work with them and ask questions of them and say, is this really what I think? Is this true? Is this not true? How do I turn that around? And ask questions of that experience and unlocking yourself from an attachment to a judgment, right? That's very, very powerful. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
If you could give one parting piece of advice to someone listening, what would it be?
Believe in yourself. Understand that there are many, many directions out there, and just pay attention to your body, and increasingly try to become authentic and aware of your internal experience and your physical experience, and have that guide you on your path, because I think that is really, at the end of the day, what's going to drive success.
I love that. Sunjya, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you want to know what tomorrow has in store like I do, you definitely want to listen to our recent episode where I talked to Peter Diamandis about a future where we could live forever. Thank you so much.